everyone who is present here in this hall, and thank you very much for all those who are watching us online. And hello, all the speakers of this panel. It's very sad that I'm here alone. It feels very lonely. I wish you all were here. But we will talk about the intricate world of lobbying within the European Union, because this year there will be a lot of elections, very important elections in European Union. So let us, discuss that. Let us discuss the difference between lobbying practices in European Union and in the United States, and we also will be very interested in practical cases and all the insights that you have to share with us. Let's quickly make the round of introduction. I see only 3 speakers out of pretty many that were announced. However, we will probably do it in such a way that I will briefly introduce you, and maybe if you would like to add something, then you will have a chance to do so immediately, and then we will turn into questions. How about that? Our first distinguished speaker is Zoran Her, who is a managing partner of the European Affairs Consulting Group. He has a very rich experience in European Union affairs, having worked in different EU institutions, including the European Parliament, the EU Council, and the European Commission. And throughout the years, he has gained a very big experience in the fields of taxation and internal market. Mr. Herr, would you like to add anything about yourself so that our audience need to know?
Yes, thank you, moderator and chair. It's a pleasure being with you today. I'm in principle residing in Brussels. Indeed, I'm in Berlin today and speaking from another European capital. The only thing I would like to add maybe to your excellent introduction is that I've been involved also over the years, during the more than 20 years of activity in Brussels, in teaching and academic activities. I've been co-managing the first actually institute in Brussels that was created to give courses on public affairs and advocacy. And I'm still lecturing at universities throughout Europe occasionally on these topics.
Let's move on, and I would like to introduce right now Piotr Kaszuvara, who is a Polish journalist and a war correspondent who was born in Radomsko, but closely associated with Wrocław and Lower Silesia. And since 2011, he has been a journalist for Polish radio in Wrocław and also collaborated with Warsaw Radio. For several years, he has been involved into investigative journalism, covering high-profile criminal cases, and in summer of 2022, he is dividing his time between Ukraine and Wrocław. Piotr, anything else you would like to add to this introduction?
Thank you very much for invitation. First of all, I'm very glad to be here with all of you. I'm running my own NGO called UA Future for Ukraine, and probably for now this is my main job, Unfortunately, because I love to be a journalist, but maybe one day after the war.
Thank you very much. Being a Ukrainian, I'm grateful for what you're doing because Ukraine needs all the help it can get right now. Thank you. And our last but not the least speaker is Elena. Elena, I would like to ask you to introduce yourself because unfortunately I guess you have been moved from a different panel, and I'm glad to see you here with us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yes, my name is Marina Simenuta. I'm representative of the Ukrainian Association of GR Professionals and Lobbyists. I'm from finance area. I'm co-founder of asset management company in Ukraine, and now with Valentina in Ukraine. Today we had 3 alarms, but we're working, and really glad to see everybody. Of course, we would like to speak about lobbying in Ukraine, about youth in this area, and I would like to say about our association and organizations, what value we can give for our clients and for Ukrainians and international partners. Thank you.
Elena, thank you very much. Even though this panel is devoted to mainly European Union, Ukraine as a country that is a candidate to European Union and who is now paying with the blood of its people to become a member of European Union, I think that would be an interesting, very valuable expertise that you will share. So let us move to questions, and my first question to all of you would be as follows. The legislative regulation of lobbying in the European Union is generally considered to be more lenient than the one in the United States. And some European countries also have their own regulations. For example, it's France, it's Great Britain, Germany, and so on and so forth. So in your opinion, does this work? Because on the one hand, European Union is very regulated. Do you think it makes the work in European Union easier or more difficult for those who are trying to lobby there? Mr. Harm, maybe we will start with you.
Okay, yes, thank you. Well, as you said already, we are talking about very different regions here. Europe is a continent not as big as America, but however, a very diverse continent with many countries. And if we only focus on the European Union at the moment, we have nevertheless 27 member states at the focus, and that means also 28 different situations because we have huge national divergences when it comes to regulation of lobbying. And so the one model, of course, doesn't exist. The European model doesn't exist. We have very different realities. And what we can see is that often relatively modern concepts, let's say, of approaching lobby transparency and lobby regulation, often inspiration came from centers such as Brussels, of course, but then also the Anglo-Saxon countries, and then were triggering down to other countries, starting maybe with larger capitals like Paris or Berlin, for instance, and then going further to smaller countries. Some of these countries have been discussing for many years on how to regulate lobbying. I think just now in the last couple of hours, Croatia, after 17 years of discussion, decided on its first ever regulation on lobbying. And so we are looking at very different realities. Some countries have regulation which is, however, very vague and leaves it basically to the lobbyist to decide what he or she wants to disclose. Others are much more bureaucratic and also much more binding. So when it comes to effectiveness, is it working? Yes, it is working to a certain degree, I would say, in the sense that indeed these efforts to make lobbying transparent and impose rules on lobbying, they have created much more possibilities to follow for citizens what is going on, who is present in capitals, who is talking to politicians, also often how are organizations funded and who are key players. So that's definitely the positive side. On the other hand, if the hope was that more regulation would lead to more acceptance maybe of lobbying or of advocacy by the general public, by citizens, then I must say I have strong doubts that the effort has worked out successfully. I rather have the impression that the more people were talking about the need to regulate lobbying, the more citizens became often skeptical and suspicious. This is also linked, of course, to different perceptions in different countries, whereas in Anglo-Saxon countries, lobbying has a very long tradition. These were the first democratic parliaments, if we can say so. People were waiting in the lobby. This was, I think, why they were called lobbyists in the beginning. And it's something that, let's say, Anglo-Saxon democracies have somehow grown up with, whereas in other languages and in other countries, lobbying sounds often very negative. In some countries, it is seen by citizens as almost the same as corruption. And this is very difficult to overcome, of course, for regulators trying to bring order into that, also for public affairs association representatives who try to explain what it really is and what it is not. Finally, the last remark I would like to make in this context is there is a tendency also that the legitimacy of interest representation is challenged in these times by, let's say, hardcore NGOs, I would call it, being very suspicious towards any lobbying from the private sector. And these often very small organizations, but also very vocal organizations, are publicly questioning, for instance, the fact that members of parliament talk more to industry lobbyists than they talk to NGOs, where you could say this is maybe natural since there are many more corporate lobbyists than NGOs. But however, this mathematic disbalance is seen as something very problematic. And then you also have recently more and more discussion about whether policymakers should meet with certain sector representatives, sectors that NGOs don't like tobacco industry, for instance, or representative of fossil fuel companies. And so just the mere fact that these lobbyists are meeting policymakers is already something that is criticized, and that raises, of course, fundamental questions. What should be allowed in a democracy? Should there be limits to the representation of interest? Should policymakers be selective on which is let's say, a legitimate lobbyist and who is not a legitimate lobbyist? So this is something we can see more recently, and it would be interesting to hear how these questions are discussed in other regions of the world as well, of course. Thank you.
Then a very short follow-up question. Citizens apart, what do you personally think about the initiative to unify all this diverse lobbying legislation in different countries and maybe create a universal for European Union framework? In your opinion, would that help, or would that be against the interest of national governments and citizens?
Well, that's a very good question. Nobody in Brussels likes, of course, harmonizing things and imposing rules on everyone, but in this case, it hasn't been really tried, and I think that's also because traditions and parliamentary rules are extremely different from one country to another. So I think it's good that there is a push for certain standards that definitely comes from Brussels, even indirectly to national capitals, and organizations are looking at what is going on in Brussels and think, well, what should we take over of this? I think it helps the professionalization of the government relations sector, and also helps promoting ethical standards. Now, do we need one rule for all? No, probably we don't. But what could be helpful also for lawmakers in countries, especially in countries where they don't have a regulation on lobbying yet, is something like a catalog of common standards or must-haves in lobby regulation. And there are some efforts to come up with something like that, but at the moment more under the roof of the OECD, for instance, than under the umbrella of the European Union.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to Piotr. I would like to hear your perspective from Poland. Would Poland agree to harmonize its legislation, and how, in general, the lobbying efforts are regulated in the country?
Yeah, it's very hard to say what Poland will do, and if Poland will agree or not really. I think for now there is not that many differences between the regulations in the European Commission, for example, lobbying in the European Commission and in Poland in general, because in Poland also all the lobbyists, they need to be registered. Anyway, even Poland is a part of the structures of European Union and the NATO for a long time. The lobbying actually remains a largely unexplored territory in our country. Meetings with lobbyists are associated with kind of a dodgy business, illegal influence, or even corruption, as Mr. Har said just before, even a pressure on the authorities to achieve financial benefits, for example. So it has pretty bad, pretty negative associations, but partly due to these urban legends, I will say, associated with lobbyists, a large part of lobbying in Poland as well as in European Union is carried out by non-governmental organizations, trade unions, employers organizations, or local government organizations lobbying for their specific laws, for example. There are many such organizations conducting both formal and informal lobbying in Poland. Every lobbyist in our country should be registered. I say should because it doesn't work that way always with the lobbying, like informal lobbying. In the Polish Parliament, there has been a special register of lobbyists for several years. So everyone could easily check who can work with the politicians or who cannot. It includes the name of the individual, the name of the organization they work for, the name of the partner whose interests they represent. There is a description of their activities and then identification number. I don't know if it's similar to the USA. Lobbyists also, they need to introduce themselves, disclose the purpose of the conversation and the person or organization they are lobbying for. Officially, there are approximately about 70 individual lobbyists, 70, registered in the Polish Parliament, so it's not that much. In the registers of organizations monitoring lobbyists in Poland, there are about 6,000 individual lobbyists operating in Poland, and about 4,500 organizations also operating in the lobbying sphere. Among the most active organizations participating in the legislative processes in Poland is the Association of Polish Cities, a local government organization primarily interested in legislation related to the local government's or regional policy. This lobbying organization includes, among the others, the leaders of the largest Polish cities. Their representatives actively participate in parliamentary committee meetings. Experts speak up during these meetings, aiming to, for example, draft a particular law, draw attention to a specific problem and attempt to proceed with it, or make changes to existing law. In addition to local government officials, representatives of employers' organizations are also visible among Polish lobbyists, for example, the Leviathan Confederation, or the employers of the Republic of Poland, Pracodawcy RP, we call it in Polish. These are not purely lobbying associations, but they represent a certain social group of companies affiliated with their organization. due to their legal identity, they can not only participate in parliamentary committee meetings and work with the parliament, but what is also very important, they can include their experts, their representatives in the various fields as the experts. So representatives of this organization also participate in panels and conferences organized, for example, by them, where representatives of the political and business world are also invited. Not necessarily to be persuaded or convinced, but often to gain the knowledge, contacts, and understand an expert point of view on a particular issue. Because in Poland, politicians, ministers are very often not experts in their fields, despite holding the office.
Piotr, thank you very much for this very detailed insight into what's going on in Poland. And now let's have a look at what's going on in Ukraine. Irina, recently Ukraine adopted a law on lobbyism, and I think that this topic will be covered in way more details in the next panel. However, in your experience, how does Ukrainian lobbying landscape look like? The Wild West, or is it well regulated? You can share your own experience or just give us the overall insight.
Yeah, thank you. As you know, the Verkhovna Rada has adopted the law on honest lobbying and was signed by the President on March 12, 2024. This law ensures the legal basics of lobbying in Ukraine in accordance with international practices and standards. Our Association of GR professionals and lobbyists have actively contributed to the regulation of lobbying in Ukraine by writing and discussing legislative initiatives. For example, in October 2022, we discussed the draft law on lobbying, which was adopted in the first reading, together with deputies, representatives, and anti-corruption bodies and public organizations, of course. Our association has been actively participating in the adoption of the law and lobbying for 8 years. Thanks specialists like Katya Darchenko and other our specialists and partners in our association. This is it is an important step for Ukraine on the way to European integration, because the law of lobbying is one of the key requirements for European Union. We, like a Ukrainian Association of GR professional and lobbyists, unites corporate professionals and specialized organizations practicing in the field of government relations, public affairs, public advocacy, on the purpose of representing business interests and dialogue with the authorities. What kind of value do we give? Protection of rights and interests. We care about the protection of support of every member of association, relation with the authorities. We strive for transparent communication with the state authorities and municipalities. Support for relation with the public. We maintain a relation with the mass media and the public, cooperation with international partners. We use experience of our foreign partners, of course. Thanking these opportunities, and we would like to invite new partners to join work with our association.
Irina, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And on the next panel, we will have the author of the law on lobbying that was recently adopted in Ukraine, and I think that we will have more insights on that, which is very an interesting development, I would say. And my next question to all three of you would be: do you see that there are specific fields where lobbyists show the most activities in? For Mr. Har, that would be the level of the European Union. For Piotr, that would be Poland, and for Irina, that would be Ukraine. So where do lobbyists work most, if that could be observed? And maybe you can share one example of such initiatives, successful or unsuccessful, but something that might provide an insight of how the system works. Thank you. Mr. Har, maybe you will start.
Yes, thank you. Well, if we look at the European Union level, if we look at Brussels, then the first thing that comes to mind at the moment, and we are of course at the end of a legislative cycle now, we are coming close to the end of a 5-year mandate in Brussels, but the most obvious field is everything related to the famous European Green Deal. So this huge package of legislation targeting a certain transformation, ecologic transformation of the European Union, and transformation of the European economy towards something that is more in line with the climate targets to which Europe has committed at the international level. So this is definitely the one big thing standing out. This is has been priority number one in this legislature, and it can be broken down into many individual fields. You are asking for an example. Circularity, for instance, is a concept that is pushed in many areas. I've followed that myself, for instance, in the field of textiles. A deep transformation of how textile production in Europe, but also from outside Europe, should look like tomorrow, where Europe tries to replace, for instance, plastics and make sure that fast fashion disappears more or less and is replaced by something that is much closer to the environmental transformation we would like to reach. So this is definitely a number one. Many of these things have gone through or are in the close to the finishing line now at the moment. Of course, people are pushing very much in these days in Brussels to get things across the lines before the European Parliament dissolves. In 6 weeks, the members of the European Parliament will go home, to put it that way, to fully concentrate on campaigning, and in June then the next European Parliament will be elected by citizens. So there is very little time left to finish the outstanding things. We also have to say that, of course, a number of things have been just shelved, has been withdrawn by the European Commission, for instance. Things where the European Commission was probably fearing in the pre-election period that they wouldn't find enough support among citizens for them. Some issues which are controversial. We have had another colleague mentioning earlier today the farmers and agriculture. This is a good example of how people can mobilize against decisions which are coming from the European level. And of course now the parties are increasingly moving into a position where they don't want to hurt too many people, where they don't want to create too much resistance, because they fear that if they push through their agendas in a too rude way, let's say, then they may lose public support in the election. Then the big question is, of course, what comes next? What will be the topics which we will see as priorities in the next 5-year mandate of the next European Parliament and the next European Commission? And this is what, of course, is our role at the moment, to find these new topics where they are discussed behind the scenes at the moment. Also help our clients suggesting some topics for the next 5 years. Some things, of course, are very obvious. I give you just one example: defense. The European Union is very powerless at the moment when it comes to defense. At the same time, events in Ukraine show how important it is that Europe coordinates much better and also creates resources to allow its members to deter further regression from Russia, for instance. So you will see a lot of things happening, I think, in this field in the next 5 years.
Thank you very much. Piotr, you would be the next, and I would like you to maybe pay a little bit of attention to what's going on with Polish farmers, especially with regards to those protests that harm Ukraine-Polish relationships and harm Ukraine's economy as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it, if it's a success or not really, for the farmers, lobbyists right now, because at the end, someone is talking to them, someone is caring about their thoughts, and their way of doing the things. So we can talk about the success, but on the other hand, I am thinking, like, if we will have better lobbyist groups, for example, maybe we will never have this kind of crisis at the border, because we could talk about it, in the cabinets, not on the streets, as the farmers are doing now. And if you will have a look on the statistics, you can also notice that this is very similar to the European Union in Poland. Like 3 of 7 biggest lobbyist groups in Poland in last couple of years, they were farmers. Units, for example, of the made by the farmers, and other groups. So they've been lobbying a lot. They've been lobbying a lot, but also to talk about something nicer, let's call it. We in Poland, in the place of the professional lobbyists, as we said before, we observe more NGOs and non-governmental organizations to lobby for the things, and we see this movement in Poland also if we will have a look on the young people, and this is very cool, and I really like it, because a lot of young people in Poland, they are creating their own associations made out of the young enthusiasts, but also often high-class specialists in their fields, and they can really influence many urban investments, for example, such as parks, shopping malls, bus stops, tram stops, railway stations, or overall building of the communication network. For example, in Wrocław, Akcja Wrocław, there is an association in my city. They are working for years already in the city. They pushed a lot of new laws and legislation processes in the city, as they really wanted to represent the people, living in our city, the point of view of the residents. So these groups, they work a lot with social media, they work a lot with YouTube, with Facebook, Instagram, they have some influences. There is a lot of people sharing the same things. They are organizing their own panels. They are trying to sell their stories to the media, because they are interesting, more interesting sometimes than the typical way of communication between the authorities and the people. So they are trying to find these triggers, sometimes, and just use them because they know what is attractive for media and how to sell it, because these people, as I said before, they are very young. There is also another person in Wrocław, Adam Komar. He's the president of Potrafię Pomóc Foundation, also helping Ukraine from the beginning of the war. And Adam represents the third, I will say, area of the interest of the lobbyists in Poland. So the first one was the how to say it, the local authorities, the second one farmers, and then we have the third very popular sector is medicine, healthcare. So Adam has been advocating for respite care for patients, parents of disabled children, and many other laws related to the health protection of children with rare disease and medical assessments in this disease. So we have a couple of successes in Poland.
Thank you very much, and let's move on to Ukraine. Elena, what can you share about the efforts of lobbyists in Ukraine? Maybe you can share example from your own work. It would be very interesting for us.
Yeah, thank you, colleagues, and I agree with them. Ukraine, and we have really many problems in different areas with the funds, with agriculture, with harvesting sustainability, with, I don't know, with technoparks and other. And for Ukraine, it's of course the new rules and new law. Our association for 9 years has held 10 plus conferences, seminars, experience exchange programs, forums such as the 7 international GR forums in partnership with the USA, EU countries, and Great Britain and other different countries, and worked for the best specialists and other works of GR in Ukraine. And this year we have planned to hold a number of events. What main activities we can do now? It's opportunities for professional networking, exchange of experience with the professionals in the field of GR, communications with the most successful specialists in Ukraine and of course in the world, obtaining practical knowledge and the experience of relevant industries, mentors, support for targeted requests and others. Yeah, thank you.
Dear speakers, thank you very much for your insights. We are at time. I would like to ask the public if you have any questions to any of our speakers. Or shall we move to the next panel?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for listening. And I give the word to the next moderator, right? Katerina, thank you very much for the invitation.